There's a moment in every life when the masks we wear begin to feel impossibly heavy. When the roles we play, the successful professional, the perfect parent, the strong friend, start to crack under the weight of simply being human. You might be sitting in your car after a long day, feeling utterly exhausted not from what you did, but from who you had to pretend to be. Or perhaps you're lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering if anyone truly knows the real you beneath all the doing and achieving and becoming. This isn't depression talking, it's your soul whispering that there's another way to live. A way that doesn't require you to be anyone other than exactly who you are, right here, right now. The ancient wisdom traditions knew this secret, and today we're going to explore how coming home to yourself isn't just possible, it's your birthright. Sometimes the most radical act is simply being present with what is. We live in a culture obsessed with transformation. Everywhere you look, someone is selling you a better version of yourself. Lose weight, gain confidence, find your purpose, manifest your dreams. The self-help industry has convinced us that who we are right now isn't enough, that we need to become someone else to be worthy of love, success, or happiness. But what if this entire premise is backwards? What if the very act of trying to become someone else is what's keeping you from discovering who you truly are? I spent decades of my life as Richard Alpert, a Harvard psychology professor, climbing the ladder of academic achievement. I had the degrees, the tenure, the respect of my peers. I was becoming someone important, someone significant. Yet late at night, when the accolades faded and the office grew quiet, I felt a profound emptiness. There was this nagging sense that I was living someone else's life, playing a role that fit me about as well as a suit 3 sizes too small. The practice of self-research begins with a startling recognition. Most of what you think you are isn't actually you. It's a collection of stories, expectations, and identities you've accumulated over the years like layers of clothing. Your professional identity, your family role, your political beliefs, your personality traits, these are all costumes you're wearing, not your essence. The researcher in you learns to observe these layers without getting lost in them. Think about how you introduce yourself at parties. I'm a teacher, I'm a mother, I'm an entrepreneur. Notice how quickly you reach for these external definitions. But what happens when you strip away the job title, the relationship status, the achievements? What remains when you're not trying to be anyone at all? This isn't a philosophical exercise. It's the beginning of real freedom. The weight of becoming is exhausting because it's built on a fundamental lie, that you're not enough as you are. Every morning you wake up and put on the armor of improvement. You check your meditation app, read your affirmations, set your intentions, all in service of becoming a better person. But who decided the person you are right now needs improving? And more importantly, who is it that's trying to do the improving? The stranger who cuts you off in traffic becomes a mirror showing you whether you're identified with your story or resting in awareness. Everyone and everything in your life becomes part of your practice, your curriculum for learning to love more unconditionally. This brings us to perhaps the most beautiful discovery in the entire journey of self-research. Every relationship, no matter how brief or challenging, is an opportunity for mutual awakening. The person annoying you at the coffee shop is consciousness exploring what it's like to be impatient. The friend going through a divorce is awareness experiencing the dissolution of identity. The child having a tantrum is pure life force expressing itself without filters. When you can see past the surface drama to the consciousness that's playing all the roles, every encounter becomes sacred. We're all just walking each other home. That's really what this is all about. Home to the recognition of what we've always been beneath all the stories, all the seeking, all the struggling to become someone special. Home to the love that's been loving us through every disguise we've worn, every mistake we've made, every moment we've forgotten who we really are. The metaphor of walking each other home captures something essential about the nature of relationship on this journey. We're not trying to drag anyone toward enlightenment or convince them to see things our way. We're simply being authentic companions on the path, offering whatever support we can while honoring each person's unique way of finding their way back to truth. Sometimes that means sharing what you've learned. More often it means simply being present with someone exactly where they are. You begin to see that every person you meet is at exactly the right stage of their journey, learning exactly what they need to learn in exactly the way they need to learn it. The purse. Unstuck in victim consciousness is learning about powerlessness so they can discover their true power. The person obsessed with success is exploring the limitations of external achievement so they can find internal fulfillment. The person lost in spiritual concepts is discovering the gap between knowing and being so they can close it. This perspective allows you to meet people without agenda, without the need to fix or change or improve them. You can offer your presence, your love, your authentic sharing of what you've discovered, but you hold it all lightly. You trust that each person's inner wisdom will take what serves them and leave the rest. You remember that consciousness is perfectly capable of waking itself up. It doesn't need your help, though it might enjoy your companionship along the way. The researcher discovers that walking each other home isn't just about spiritual awakening. It's about being fully human together. It's about creating space for each other's joy and sorrow, success and failure, clarity and confusion. It's about remembering that behind every personality is the same awareness that's looking through your eyes, feeling through your heart, learning through your experiences. When you really get this, not just intellectually but in your bones, loneliness becomes impossible. Not because you're never alone, but because you realize you're never separate from the love that's the ground of all existence. Every person becomes a doorway back to this recognition. Every interaction becomes a chance to practice seeing the divine in human clothing. So here we are, at what might seem like the end of our exploration together, but is really just another beginning. Because the practice of self-research isn't something you complete and then move beyond. It's the very texture of an awakened life. Every morning you wake up, consciousness gets to explore itself through your particular nervous system, your unique history, your specific combination of gifts and challenges. Some days you'll remember who you are with crystal clarity. You'll move through your life from a place of such presence and love that strangers smile at you for no apparent reason. Difficulties resolve themselves with surprising ease, and you feel like you're being lived by something infinitely wise and compassionate. Other days you'll forget completely, get lost in your stories about what's wrong with you or the world, and feel like you're back at square one. Both experiences are perfect. Both are necessary parts of the dance. The days of forgetting teach you humility and compassion for others who are struggling. The days of remembering give you the strength to keep going when the path feels unclear. Consciousness is equally present in your confusion and your clarity, your fear and your love, your contraction and your expansion. The great secret is that you don't have to wait until you've perfected your practice to start living from love. You don't need to complete your healing to begin serving others. You don't have to understand everything to trust the mystery that's living itself through you. Right now, exactly as you are, with all your unfinished business and incomplete realizations, you are the perfect expression of consciousness learning to know itself through human experience. This is the ultimate finding of the practice of self-research. There is nothing to find. You are what you were seeking. You've always been what you were seeking. The journey home isn't about getting somewhere else. It's about recognizing where you've always been, and that recognition, that coming home to yourself, that's what transforms everything without changing anything at all. The path continues moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice. And in each moment, you get to rediscover the miracle of being alive, being aware, being love in human form. What an extraordinary adventure consciousness has created for itself. What a privilege to be here, walking each other home, When you begin to research yourself with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, something miraculous happens. You start to see that beneath all the becoming is pure being. Beneath all the doing is simple presence. Beneath all the achieving is unconditional aliveness. The researcher doesn't try to change what they observe, they simply witness it with compassion and awareness. This shift from becoming to being isn't a destination you arrive at once and stay forever. It's a practice, a moment-by-moment choice to meet yourself where you are rather than where you think you should be. Sometimes you'll catch yourself mid-performance, realize you're acting out a role, and gently return to authenticity. Other times you'll be so lost in the drama of improvement that hours pass before you remember to simply be present with what is. The beautiful paradox is that when you stop trying to become someone else, you often find yourself naturally evolving in ways that feel organic and true. But this evolution happens from a place of self-acceptance rather than self-rejection, from love rather than fear. You change not because you're broken, but because you're alive. Now, as you begin to see through the exhausting game of constant becoming, you might wonder, if I'm not trying to be someone else, what exactly am I supposed to do with my mind? This brings us to one of the most profound discoveries in the practice of self-research. The spaces between your thoughts are not empty. They're pregnant with possibility. Most people experience their minds like a crowded subway station during rush hour. Thoughts pushing and shoving, urgent announcements echoing overhead, everyone trying to get somewhere else as quickly as possible. Your internal dialogue rarely stops. Planning tomorrow's meeting, replaying yesterday's conversation, analyzing, judging, comparing, worrying. The researcher begins to ice this mental chaos, not to stop it, but to find the quiet platform where you can observe the trains of thought without jumping on everyone. There's a meditation teacher who used to say that thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of consciousness. Most of us think we are the clouds, dark and stormy, or light and fluffy, always changing, always moving. But the practice of self-research reveals that you are the sky itself, vast, unchanging, always present, completely unaffected by whatever weather patterns move through it. This sacred pause, the space between thoughts, is where your true nature lives. It's not something you have to create or achieve. It's already there, waiting patiently for you to notice it. When you're stressed, it's there. When you're happy, it's there. When you're confused or clear, angry or peaceful, this awareness remains constant like the blue sky behind the clouds. Learning to rest in this space doesn't require years of meditation practice or retreats in mountain caves. It can happen right now in the middle of your ordinary life. You're reading these words, and between each word is a tiny gap of silence. Between each breath is a moment of stillness. Between each heartbeat is a pause that contains eternity. The researcher learns to recognize these micro moments of presence and gradually extend them. But here's what's fascinating. When you begin to inhabit these spaces regularly, your relationship with your thoughts completely transforms. Instead of being tossed around by every mental wind, you become the witness. You watch your mind create stories about why someone didn't text you back, and you smile at the drama. You observe your ego strategizing about future success, and you feel compassion for its earnest efforts. You notice your inner critic delivering its daily sermon about your inadequacies, and you recognize it as just another cloud passing through. The sacred pause isn't about achieving a blank mind or stopping thoughts altogether. That's like trying to stop the ocean from making waves. Instead, it's about developing what the Buddhists call don't know mind, a spacious awareness that can hold all of your experience without being disturbed by it. In this space, you're not trying to figure anything out or fix anything. You're simply present with what is, exactly as it is. From this place of witnessing awareness, something extraordinary begins to emerge. You start to realize that the love you've been seeking in relationships, achievements, and experiences has been present all along in the very awareness that's seeking it. This brings us to perhaps the most transformative aspect of self-research, discovering that love isn't something you feel, it's something you are. We've been taught to think of love as an emotion, something that comes and goes depending on circumstances. You love someone when they're kind to you, when they meet your needs, when they make you feel good about yourself. You love your job when it's fulfilling, your body when it's healthy, your life when things are going well. But this conditional love is exhausting because it depends entirely on externalities, conditions you can't control. The researcher discovers a different kind of love. Not an emotion, but the very fabric of consciousness itself. This loving awareness doesn't depend on anything being different than it is. It's the unconditional presence that can hold joy and sorrow, success and failure, health and illness with equal embrace. It's the love that loves you when you're unlovable, that stays present when you're pushing everyone away, that sees your beauty when you can only see your flaws. This isn't romantic love or familial love or friendship love, though it includes all of these. This is the love that's loving right now as you read these words, the same love that was present when you took your first breath and will be there when you take your last. It's the love that loves the difficult person at work, the challenging family member, the parts of yourself you've been trying to hide or change for years. When you begin to recognize this loving awareness as your true nature, something shifts in how you move through the world. You stop trying to get love from other people and instead become a conduit for love to flow through you. You realize that every person you meet is this same loving awareness, wearing a different costume, playing a different role, lost in a different story about who they think they are. The practice becomes learning to see past the personality, past the behavior, past the drama, to the consciousness that's looking through every pair of eyes. This doesn't mean you become a doormat or lose your ability to set boundaries. If anything, you become clear about what serves love and what doesn't. But you stop taking other people's unconsciousness personally because you remember that unconsciousness is just forgetting who you really are, and you've forgotten too. Many times. This loving awareness transforms not just your relationships with others, but your relationship with yourself. You begin to hold your own fears, anger, sadness, and confusion with the same tenderness you'd offer a frightened child. You stop trying to be a perfect spiritual person and start being a compassionate human being. You realize that your mistakes, your struggles, your very humanity are not obstacles to love. They are love expressing itself through the beautiful, messy experience of being incarnated in a human body. The researcher learns that this love doesn't make everything easy, but it makes everything workable. It doesn't eliminate pain, but it transforms suffering. It doesn't solve all your problems, but it changes your relationship to problems so fundamentally that they no longer define your experience. When you know yourself as love itself, everything becomes an opportunity to express that love more fully. As this loving awareness begins to permeate your daily experience, you start to notice something that might initially seem unsettling. The very sense of being a separate person, living in a world of other separate people, begins to feel like an elaborate game of make-believe. You walk through your neighborhood and suddenly realize that the boundaries you've always assumed existed between you and the trees, the sky, the stranger walking past, these boundaries exist only in thought, not in reality. This recognition can be profoundly disorienting at first. Your entire life has been built on the assumption that you are here in your body and everything else is out there separate from you. You have your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, and everyone else has theirs. You work to get closer to people you love and distance yourself from people who disturb you. You try to acquire things that will make you happy and avoid situations that might cause pain. All of this is based on the fundamental belief in separation. But the researcher begins to see that this separation is like the horizon line when you're standing on the beach. It appears absolutely real, absolutely solid, until you start walking toward it and realize it's always the same distance away. The closer you look at where you end and the world begins, the more impossible it becomes to find an actual boundary. Your breath mingles with the air around you. Your thoughts arise from the same consciousness that's thinking through every other mind. Your very sense of being alive is the same aliveness that's beating every heart, growing every blade of grass, spinning every planet. This isn't just poetic metaphor. It's direct experience available to anyone willing to investigate deeply enough. When you're truly present, when you're not lost in stories about yourself and others, the sense of separate selfhood becomes transparent. You realize you've been like someone who's so focused on watching a movie that they forget they're sitting in a theater. The drama on screen feels completely real until you remember you're the awareness watching it all unfold. The beautiful paradox is that recognizing the illusion of separation doesn't make you disappear into some cosmic soup where individual differences no longer matter. Instead, it allows you to participate more fully in the dance of relationship and form while knowing it's all one consciousness playing hide and seek with itself. You can love someone passionately while knowing there's no real separation between you. You can have preferences and make choices while understanding that the chooser and the chosen are one. You can work to improve conditions in the world while seeing that there's ultimately nowhere to go and nothing to fix. This recognition naturally leads to a profound shift in how you relate to the parts of yourself you've been trying to hide, fix, or transcend. When you know yourself as vast awareness, temporarily identifying with a human personality, you can finally afford to be honest about the full spectrum of what that personality contains. Most spiritual seekers spend enormous energy trying to be good, trying to transcend their lower nature, trying to rise above their human messiness. But the researcher discovers that this very effort to be spiritual often becomes another form of violence against yourself. You split yourself into the acceptable spiritual parts and the unacceptable human parts, then wage an internal war that can last for decades. What if instead of trying to eliminate your anger, you got curious about it? What if instead of being ashamed of your jealousy, you investigated where it comes from? What if your neediness, your pettiness, your fear weren't obstacles to enlightenment, but doorways into greater self-understanding? The practice of dancing with your shadows isn't about indulging destructive behaviors. It's about bringing conscious awareness to the parts of yourself you've been unconsciously rejecting. I remember spending years trying to be the perfect spiritual teacher, always calm, always wise, always loving. But life has a way of exposing your shadows whether you invite them or not. When I had my stroke, I was confronted with rage, self-pity, and fear in ways that shattered my carefully constructed spiritual identity. I could no longer be the teacher who had transcended human limitations. I had to learn to be a human being, learning to be present with very real limitations. This was actually a gift, though it didn't feel like one at the time. It forced me to develop a more honest, more integrated relationship with my humanity. I learned that you can be deeply spiritual and still get irritated when someone cuts you off in traffic. You can have profound realizations about the nature of love and still feel hurt when someone misunderstands you. You can know yourself as infinite consciousness and still need help getting to the bathroom. The researcher learns to hold these apparent contradictions with compassion rather than trying to resolve them. You become interested in your patterns rather than ashamed of them. When you notice yourself being defensive, instead of immediately trying to be more open, you get curious. What am I defending? What feels threatened right now? When you catch yourself judging someone, instead of judging yourself for judging, you investigate, what does this judgment reveal about my own fears or insecurities? This dance with your shadows becomes a form of intimacy with yourself that's far more nourishing than the exhausting effort to be perfect. You start to see that every difficult emotion, every challenging pattern, every aspect of yourself you've been trying to transcend contains valuable information. Your anger might be pointing to boundary violations you haven't acknowledged. Your sadness might be revealing how deeply you care about something. Your fear might be showing you where you're still trying to control outcomes. As you develop this more integrated relationship with yourself, you naturally become more skillful at working with difficulty when it arises. Instead of being blindsided by your own reactivity, you start to recognize the early warning signs and respond with awareness rather than just reacting unconsciously. You develop what you might call emotional intelligence, not the ability to control your emotions, but the capacity to be present with them in ways that serve love rather than fear. This brings us to one of the most profound aspects of self-receipt. Learning to work consciously with suffering when it inevitably appears in your life. Because here's what no one tells you about spiritual practice. Awakening doesn't eliminate pain. If anything, it makes you more sensitive to the suffering that's already present but has been numbed by unconsciousness, addiction, and distraction. When real difficulty hits, the death of someone you love, the diagnosis you didn't expect, the betrayal that shatters your trust, all your spiritual concepts can feel utterly inadequate. You can know intellectually that everything is perfect as it is, but when you're doubled over with grief, that knowledge doesn't touch the rawness of what you're experiencing. You can understand that suffering comes from attachment, but when you're losing something precious, letting go feels impossible. The art of conscious suffering isn't about transcending pain or finding meaning in tragedy. It's about learning to be fully present with difficulty without adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from resisting what's happening. Pain is inevitable when you have a human body and an open heart. Suffering, the mental and emotional struggle against pain, is optional, but it takes tremendous practice to recognize the difference. When my guru, Neem Karoli Baba, died, I was devastated. I had found this being who embodied unconditional love, who seemed to see straight through all my personality to my essence, who loved me in a way I had never experienced. And then he was gone. I could have told myself that death is an illusion, that he was still present in my heart, that this was all perfect dharma. And in some ultimate sense, all of that might be true, but what I actually felt was abandoned, heartbroken, and lost. The practice was learning to honor the grief without drowning in it, to feel the full impact of loss without creating stories about what it meant about me, about life, about whether love was safe. Conscious suffering means staying present with the raw sensation of pain without the narrative overlay that transforms pain into a drama about you. It means feeling your heart break open rather than shut down, using the intensity of loss to crack through the armor around your heart rather than building thicker walls. This conscious approach to difficulty reveals something extraordinary. Suffering becomes a doorway to compassion. When you've been brought to your knees by life circumstances, when you've felt truly helpless and afraid, you develop a visceral understanding of what every human being faces. You realize that beneath all the surface differences, the success and failure, the confidence and insecurity, the happiness and despair, everyone is dealing with the fundamental vulnerability of being alive in a world where everything you love can be taken away. This shared vulnerability becomes the foundation for genuine service, not service as a spiritual practice or a way to feel good about yourself, but service as the natural expression of recognizing that there is no other to serve. When you see past the illusion of separation, helping someone else doesn't feel like charity. It feels like taking care of yourself, because at the deepest level, that's exactly what it is. Real service emerges spontaneously when you're not trying to be helpful, when you're not working on your karma or building your spiritual resume. It happens when you're present enough to notice what's actually needed and responsive enough to offer what you can without attachment to the outcome. Sometimes service looks like grand gestures, starting foundations, organizing relief efforts, dedicating your life to a cause. But more often it's much simpler, really listening to someone who needs to be heard, offering practical help without being asked, bringing presence to situations where people are suffering. The researcher discovers that service is ultimately selfish in the most beautiful way possible. When you help someone from a place of genuine connection rather than obligation, you always receive more than you give. Not because you're trying to get something in return, but because the act of serving dissolves the illusion of separation that creates loneliness in the first place. You realize that everyone you help is actually helping you remember who you are beneath the story of being an isolated individual struggling through life alone. This journey of service and conscious suffering eventually leads to a curious phenomenon that catches many sincere seekers off guard. Just when you think you've found the path, just when you're getting good at being present and loving and aware, your ego launches what feels like a final counterattack. It's subtle and sophisticated, far more clever than the obvious resistance you encountered in the beginning. Now, your ego doesn't fight spirituality, it co-opts it. You begin to notice yourself keeping score of your spiritual progress. You're proud of how present you were during that difficult conversation. You feel superior to people who are still caught up in materialism. You start to see yourself as more evolved than your friends who haven't done their inner work. You might even catch yourself thinking that your particular spiritual path is more authentic than others, that your teacher is more realized, that your understanding is deeper. This is the ego's last stand, and it's perhaps the most seductive trap on the entire journey. Because now you're not just seeking success, money, or approval, you're seeking enlightenment. You're not just trying to be better than others at business or relationships. You're trying to be more spiritual, more awakened, more conscious. The same competitive drive that once focused on external achievements now turns inward, creating a spiritual materialism that can be even more imprisoning than the regular kind. The researcher learns to watch for the telltale signs of this spiritual ego. Are you using meditation as another form of self-improvement? Are you collecting spiritual experiences like trophies? Do you feel disappointed when your practice doesn't produce the insights or states you expect? Are you secretly hoping that your spiritual growth will make you special, will finally give you the significance you've been seeking? These aren't setic signs that you're doing something wrong. They're natural stages in the evolution of consciousness, but they need to be seen clearly if you're going to move through them rather than getting stuck in them. What's fascinating is that this spiritual seeking, even when it's infected with ego, eventually exhausts itself through its own sincerity. You can only try so hard to be enlightened before you realize that the one who's trying is the very obstacle you're trying to overcome. You can only accumulate so many spiritual concepts before you see that concepts can never capture the reality they point toward. You can only chase peak experiences for so long before you understand that the awareness having the experiences is what you were actually seeking all along. The ego's last stand isn't defeated through more effort or better techniques. It collapses when you finally get tired of being someone seeking something, when you realize that all your spiritual practices, all your insights, all your growth have been like decorating a prison cell instead of finding the door. The door was never locked. You were never actually imprisoned. You were just so busy being a seeker that you forgot to notice you were already free. This recognition doesn't mean you stop practicing or learning or growing, but the motivation shifts completely. You no longer meditate to become enlightened. You meditate because you are enlightened, and this is how enlightenment expresses itself through this particular nervous system. You don't serve others to earn spiritual points. You serve because love is your nature, and service is how love moves in the world. You don't study wisdom teachings to accumulate knowledge. You study because consciousness enjoys recognizing itself in different forms. As this more effortless relationship with practice emerges, you begin to discover what it actually means to live as love in human form. This isn't about being perpetually blissful or never having problems. It's about bringing the quality of loving awareness to whatever is actually happening in your ordinary, messy, beautiful human life. Living as love might mean staying present with your teenager's anger instead of taking it personally. It might mean offering genuine attention to the grocery store clerk who seems overwhelmed. It could be choosing to respond to criticism with curiosity rather than defensiveness, or finding compassion for your own mistakes instead of launching into self-attack. Love in human form is rarely dramatic or mystical. It's more likely to show up as patience in traffic, kindness to difficult people, or simply remembering to breathe when life gets overwhelming. The practice becomes learning to recognize the countless micro moments throughout each day when you can choose love over fear, presence over distraction, openness over contraction. You're in line at the bank, and the person ahead of you is taking forever. Do you cultivate irritation or practice patience? Your partner says something that triggers your insecurities. Do you defend and counterattack or pause and investigate what's really happening inside you? You make a mistake at work. Do you spiral into shame or treat yourself with the compassion you'd offer a good friend? These small choices accumulate into a completely different way of being alive. You start to notice that when you choose love consistently, life responds in kind. Not because you're manifesting good things through positive thinking, but because love is the natural frequency of the universe, and when you align with it, you experience reality as it actually is, rather than through the filter of fear and separation. This doesn't mean everything becomes easy or that difficult people suddenly become pleasant. It means you develop the capacity to meet whatever arises with an open heart and a clear mind. You learn to stay centered in love, even when the person in front of you is completely lost in fear. You discover that you can be truly helpful to others only when you're not trying to change them or fix them or save them from their own experience. The researcher realizes that every interaction becomes an opportunity to practice. The difficult customer service representative becomes your meditation teacher. The family member who pushes all your buttons becomes your guide to discovering where you're still holding tension